I shoved my sleeping bag into its compression sack, pushing down with my knee to force out the last pockets of air. 3 years of camping trips with James had taught me the value of efficient packing. My checklist lay on the bed, a handwritten inventory I'd used since freshman year. Updated each trip with new essentials or crossed off redundancies. "Emma, you almost ready?" Marcus just texted they're about 20 minutes from the meeting point, James called from the doorway, keys jingling in his hand. "Almost." I tossed him my packed bag. "Just double-checking we have everything." Our apartment was small but functional, a second-floor walk-up we'd rented together since junior year began. The camping gear lived in the hall closet, emerging every few weeks when we needed to escape campus life. James caught the bag with one hand and added it to the collection by the door. Tina said her friend Rachel is already there with her. Apparently, she drives like she's qualifying for NASCAR. I felt a twinge of annoyance. This Rachel person had been a last-minute addition to our trip. Tina had called me earlier in the week, asking if her study partner could tag along. She just transferred this semester, Tina had explained. She doesn't know many people yet. I'd agreed because I couldn't think of a polite reason to say no, but I didn't love the idea. Our camping trips had always been just the 6 of us, me, James, Marcus, Lily, George, and Tina. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our established dynamics. A newcomer would change all that. I grabbed my toiletry bag and stuffed it into my backpack's side pocket. Did Tina mention anything else about her, besides being a transfer student? James shrugged. Just that she's in Tina's abnormal psych class and seems cool. He picked up both our backpacks and headed toward the door. "Come on, we're gonna hit traffic if we wait any longer." I took one last look around our bedroom, mentally checking for forgotten items before following him out. Our SUV, technically James's SUV, a 5-year-old Ford Escape he'd bought used, waited in the parking lot, already partially loaded with cooking gear and a cooler. The drive from Chapel Hill to Pisgah National Forest took just over 3 hours, cutting across the middle of North Carolina and into the mountains. James drove while I navigated, though the route was familiar enough that we didn't need much help from the GPS. "Ms. Parker wants my portfolio draft by next Wednesday," I said, staring out the window as the landscape gradually changed from suburban sprawl to rolling countryside. "And then I have that interview with the Charlotte firm on Friday." "You'll nail both," James said, reaching over to squeeze my knee. "Your designs are amazing." "Maybe. I just want to have something lined up before graduation." "You will. We both will." James had 3 interviews scheduled for the following month, all for business development positions at tech companies in the Research Triangle. That's part of why we need this trip, to clear our heads before the job hunt gets serious. We filled the rest of the drive with easy conversation, discussing graduation plans, which of our friends would likely stay in North Carolina afterward, and whether we'd renew our apartment lease for the summer. The comfort of our usual chats was nice. These rhythms and routines we'd built together over 3 years. The mountains appeared on the horizon, blue-tinged and hazy with distance at first, then more distinct as we approached. James turned onto the forest access road, the SUV handling the switchbacks with practiced ease. We'd been to Pisgah several times before, usually camping near Davidson River where the facilities were decent and the hiking trails plentiful. We pulled into the gravel parking area near the campground entrance where we'd arranged to meet. 2 vehicles were already there, Marcus's Jeep and a silver Subaru I didn't recognize, presumably Rachel's. Our friends stood in a loose circle near the trailhead. I spotted Marcus first, his tall frame unmistakable even from a distance. Lily and George were deep in conversation while Tina bounced enthusiastically between groups. And then there was someone else, standing slightly apart from the others. "There they are," James said, parking beside the Jeep. He honked twice, our standard arrival signal. Everyone turned and waved except the tall woman I didn't recognize. She simply watched, her posture unnaturally straight. Even from inside our vehicle, I noticed how still she stood compared to the others. We climbed out, and I was immediately wrapped in a hug from Lily. "Finally! We've been waiting forever," she said, though her smile took any sting from the words. "Traffic on I-40, James explained, already bumping fists with Marcus and George. Tina bounded over, pulling along the stranger who I now realized must be Rachel. "Emma, James, this is Rachel. She's in my abnormal psych class." "Rachel, these are the friends I was telling you about." Up close, Rachel was even prettier than I'd thought. She was taller than me by a few inches, with straight black hair that went past her shoulders without a single strand out of place. Her skin was really pale. What caught my attention were her eyes, though, dark and intense, checking out my face, my clothes, my hands, and then back to my face. Not like normal eye contact, more like she was studying me. "Nice to meet you," she said. Her voice was soft but precisely modulated, as if each word had been carefully selected and placed. She didn't extend her hand. "You too," I replied, suddenly aware of the sweat sticking my t-shirt to my back after the long drive. "Thanks for joining us. Tina said you're new to UNC?" "Yes." A one-word answer, followed by that same calculating look. James jumped in, friendly as always. "Where'd you transfer from?" "Up north," Rachel said, then immediately turned to Tina. "Should we begin the hike? I understand we have 2 miles to reach the campsite." The abrupt subject change was jarring, but nobody except me seemed to notice. Everyone began gathering their packs, checking water bottles, and adjusting straps. Marcus took the lead as we hit the trail, with George and Lily following. Tina walked with Rachel, pointing out various plants and landmarks with her usual enthusiasm. James and I brought up the rear. "Not much of a talker, is she?" James whispered as we walked. "No. And did you notice how she dodged your question? Just said, 'Up north.' Could be anywhere from Virginia to Maine." James shrugged. "Maybe she's just shy around new people. Give her a chance." The trail got steeper as we went, winding through thick forest with some spots opening up to show pretty views of the valley below. The others talked and laughed up ahead, and I could hear them through the trees. All except Rachel. She hiked like a robot, never tripping or missing a step on the bumpy path. While the rest of us had to step around roots and rocks, sometimes slipping or grabbing trees to keep our balance, Rachel walked like she already knew where everything was. "She's in good shape," James noted after watching Rachel easily scale a steep section that had left Tina panting. "Or she's part mountain goat," I muttered. When we reached our destination, a small clearing near a creek that was technically outside the designated campground but still within the legal backcountry camping area, everyone dropped their packs with dramatic sighs of relief. Even Marcus, who prided himself on his fitness, rolled his shoulders to release the tension. Rachel simply set her pack down and began surveying the clearing, her movements quick and decisive. We fell into our usual roles without discussion. James and Marcus cleared space for the tents while George collected firewood. Lily and I unpacked the cooking gear. Tina bounced between tasks, helping wherever needed. Rachel stood watching for a moment before Tina pulled her into the setup process. "Rachel, you can help Emma and Lily with the food prep area," Tina suggested. Rachel nodded and walked over to where I was unfolding our portable camp table. She reached for the other end, and our hands briefly touched as we lifted it into position. I pulled back right away. Her skin felt weird. Not just cold, but off somehow, like touching something fake that was trying to pass for human. My reaction must have been pretty obvious because Rachel turned her head slightly, her dark eyes staring at my face in a way that made me uncomfortable. "Sorry," I said quickly. "Static electricity, I think." Rachel stared at me a second too long before giving a quick nod and going back to work without saying anything. It was over quick, but I couldn't shake how weird it felt. That short, strange moment when something just seemed really off. That strange feeling when our hands touched lingered as we finished setting up the camp table. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe my fingers were numb from carrying the backpack, or perhaps her skin was dry from the hike. But something about the contact felt just wrong, like her skin wasn't quite right. I busied myself organizing our supplies on the newly assembled table, arranging condiments and utensils while keeping an eye on Rachel. She moved too perfectly for someone in the woods. Everything she did seemed planned instead of relaxed. "Emma, can you help with the tents?" James called from across the clearing. I welcomed the distraction. "Coming." The six of us had our tent set up down to a science after numerous camping trips together. James and I assembled our three-person tent that we shared with Lily, while Marcus, George, and Tina handled the second one. Rachel stood apart, watching our practiced routine before silently unpacking her own small one-person tent. "You don't have to sleep alone," Tina told her. "There's room with us." "I prefer my own space," Rachel replied, her voice flat and decisive. The campsite took shape as afternoon slipped toward evening. Our tents formed a loose semicircle around what would become our fire pit. Marcus and George collected rocks to build a ring while James prepared the charcoal for cooking. The remote spot along the Art Loeb Trail offered a perfect balance of seclusion and accessibility. Far enough from designated camping areas to feel like our private wilderness, but not so distant that rangers would hassle us. James pulled the cooler from behind his backpack and began prepping burgers for dinner. The familiar smell of the patties sizzling on our portable grill filled the clearing, making my stomach growl. "Dinner in 10, James announced, flipping the burgers with practiced ease. I carried paper plates and plastic utensils to the table, counting out enough for everyone. When I turned around, Rachel was standing directly behind me, causing me to jump. "I didn't hear you approach," I said, my heart rate quickening. "I move quietly," she replied, her dark eyes scanning the plates. "Do you require assistance?" Her phrasing struck me as odd. Not, "Can I help?" but, "Do you require assistance?" As if she'd learned English from a technical manual. "No, I've got it covered. Thanks, though." Everyone gathered as James served the burgers. I watched Rachel take hers with a polite nod, then sit slightly apart from our circle on a fallen log. While the rest of us devoured our food with hikers' appetites, Rachel took tiny, mechanical bites, chewing each one with deliberate slowness. Most of her burger remained untouched when she set her plate aside. "Not hungry?" I asked. "I ate before the hike," she said without elaboration. Marcus pulled a bottle of vodka from his backpack with theatrical flourish. "And now, as tradition demands, we begin the real camping experience." Tina clapped enthusiastically. "I brought those plastic shot glasses from last time." Rachel's demeanor changed instantly at the sight of the alcohol. Her posture straightened and her eyes fixed on the bottle with unexpected intensity. "You drink vodka?" Marcus asked, noticing her sudden attention. "Yes." Rachel's typically flat voice carried a hint of something new, eagerness, perhaps. Marcus poured shots for everyone. I expected Rachel to sip hers cautiously like she had with the food, but she tossed it back with surprising expertise, then extended her glass for another before anyone else had finished their first. "Whoa, slow down there," Marcus laughed, but refilled her glass anyway. The sky got dark as we finished eating. George and James teamed up to build a good fire in the pit, and soon we had flames going in the middle of our camp. It got colder once the sun went down, so we all huddled closer to the heat, sitting around the fire together. We all talked easily, sharing stories from class, bitching about professors, and making summer plans for after graduation. Rachel stayed quiet most of the time, watching everyone like she was trying to figure out what was going on. "So Rachel," Lily finally said during a lull, "Tina mentioned you transferred this semester. Where from exactly?" Rachel took another shot before answering. "Up north." "Yeah, but where specifically?" Marcus pressed, his face slightly flushed from the alcohol. "A small private college. You wouldn't recognize it." Rachel redirected immediately. Tina tells me you're applying to law schools. Which ones interest you most? Marcus launched into a detailed explanation of his top choices. And just like that, the attention moved away from Rachel. I noticed her doing this repeatedly throughout the night, deflecting personal questions by asking detailed ones of her own. When George asked about her family, she inquired about his photography. When Lily mentioned Rachel's academic interests, Rachel turned the conversation to Lily's psychology research. 3 bottles of vodka later, the group had grown louder and less coordinated. James leaned heavily against my shoulder, his words slightly slurred as he debated football rankings with Marcus. Tina had stretched out on her back, pointing at stars and giggling at her own astronomy jokes. George and Lily huddled together, speaking in low voices and occasionally laughing. I remained relatively sober, having nursed just 2 shots over several hours. The vodka held no appeal tonight. Something kept me on edge, a nagging sense that I should stay alert. Across the flames, Rachel sat perfectly upright despite having consumed more alcohol than anyone else. Her posture hadn't slackened, her words hadn't slurred. Only her eyes looked different. They seemed weirdly shiny, and when the firelight hit them, they glowed back in a creepy way. Not just a glint, but an actual glow, like you see with animals at night in headlights. I blinked, thinking the fire was tricking my eyes. When I looked again, Rachel was staring right at me, her eyes reflecting the orange flame in a way that made me feel cold even though I was sitting by the fire. "Need to pee," I muttered to James, who nodded without looking up from his conversation with Marcus. I grabbed my flashlight and walked away from the circle, heading toward a cluster of trees we'd picked as our bathroom area. The forest looked completely different in the dark, with normal trees now looking weird and scary. My flashlight showed just a small path ahead of me, lighting up bits of bushes and tree trunks that went dark again as soon as I walked past. After finding a good spot and finishing my business, I headed back toward the campfire's glow in the distance. A whisper stopped me mid-step. I turned slowly, moving my flashlight around in a circle. Nothing moved in its light. I was about to keep walking when I heard it again, a hushed sound coming from behind a big oak tree about 20 feet away. Even though I knew better, I snuck closer, keeping my flashlight pointed at the ground so I could still see in the dark. As I got closer, the whispers got clearer, a voice talking in low, urgent tones. Rachel stood with her back to me, one hand pressed against the tree trunk. She was alone, her head tilted upward like she was talking to the branches above. The language she spoke wasn't English. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. The sounds ran together in ways that didn't sound like normal talking, with weird clicks and strange tones that didn't seem like they could come from a human. My foot stepped on a dry branch, and the crack was super loud in the quiet forest. Rachel spun around crazy fast. For a split second she looked off, too tall, too sharp. But before I could figure out what I was seeing, she was just Rachel again, staring at me with those dark eyes. "Emma," she said, my name sounding oddly formal on her tongue. "Are you lost?" "No, I was just heading back to camp." I raised my flashlight slightly, illuminating her face. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, but something about her eyes made my skin crawl. "Who were you talking to?" "Talking?" She tilted her head. "I was merely appreciating the forest. The sounds at night are fascinating." My mind raced for a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd been speaking her native language, whatever that was. Or maybe I'd misheard entirely. The vodka might have affected me more than I realized. "Right. Sorry to interrupt your forest appreciation." I backed away, suddenly eager to return to the safety of the group. "I'll see you back at camp." I turned and walked fast toward the fire, not bothering to check if she followed. By the time I got back to the circle, I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The alcohol, the darkness, the weird feeling I already had about Rachel. They all mixed together to make me paranoid for a second. "You okay?" Lily asked as I sat down beside her. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine. Just got a little turned around in the dark." Minutes later, Rachel emerged from the trees and reclaimed her spot across the fire. If she had been speaking some strange language to herself in the forest, she showed no sign of it now. She accepted another shot from Marcus and jumped into a conversation about campus housing, as if nothing unusual had happened. The night wound down as the vodka bottles emptied. One by one, my friends retreated to their tents. First Tina, giggling as she crawled through the flap, then George and Marcus, arguing good-naturedly about who would make coffee in the morning. "Coming to bed?" James asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion and alcohol. "In a minute," I replied. James nodded and stumbled toward our tent, leaving just me, Lily, and Rachel around the dying fire. "I think I'm done too." Lily yawned, squeezing my shoulder as she stood. "Don't stay up too late." Then it was just Rachel and me, the fire between us reduced to glowing embers. She watched me with that same calculating intensity I'd noticed earlier. "Aren't you tired?" I asked when the silence stretched too long. "I don't require much sleep," she said, "especially not after consuming alcohol." "Right." I stood up, suddenly uneasy about being alone with her. "Well, I do. Good night, Rachel." "Good night, Emma. Sleep well." The way she said it, more like giving orders than being nice, made me feel weird again. I crawled into the tent where James was already passed out from drinking too much. He was breathing heavy and steady as I got into my sleeping bag next to him. Lily was sound asleep on his other side with her back turned to us. Even though I was super tired, I couldn't fall asleep. I just laid there thinking about everything that happened today. Rachel acting strange, her weird reactions, and those foreign words I heard her say. Each thing by itself could be normal. Maybe she's just really particular. Maybe she eats a lot when she's nervous around new people. Maybe she was just speaking another language or praying. But when you put it all together, something seemed off about it. The pieces didn't quite fit right. While I was thinking about all this, I heard a high-pitched whine near my ear. I swatted at it right away, thinking a bug had somehow gotten into our tent. The sound stopped, then started again, even closer this time. I sat up slowly, trying not to wake James or Lily. The whine kept going. Not just one, but many tiny, annoying sounds that reminded me of mosquitoes. But that didn't make sense. It was early spring in the mountains. Too cold for mosquitoes, especially at night. But the sound was definitely there, getting louder, and it seemed to be all around our tent. I woke up to something crawling on my neck. My hand shot up and swatted at it automatically. A sharp sting answered back, making me wince. My fingers came away with a crushed mosquito, its body smeared with a drop of blood that looked almost black in the dim light filtering through the tent fabric. "Impossible," I mumbled. My head throbbed as I sat up, the tent spinning slightly around me. James snored beside me, dead to the world. Lily was curled up in her sleeping bag, face pressed into her pillow. Neither showed any sign of waking soon. The spot on my neck where I'd swatted the mosquito burned. I pressed my fingers against it and felt an unusual swelling, tender and hot to the touch. Just my luck. I'd managed to get bitten by the one mosquito crazy enough to be active in early spring mountain temperatures. I crawled toward the tent entrance, trying not to disturb James or Lily. Every movement amplified the pounding in my head. Too much vodka, not enough water. A rookie camping mistake I hadn't made since freshman year. Unzipping the tent, I squinted against the morning light. Our campsite looked peaceful. The fire pit contained only gray ashes. The cooking table was orderly, and a light mist hung over the trees. The only person awake was Rachel, who crouched by the nearby stream filling water bottles with mechanical precision. I watched her for a moment. She moved with that same disturbing efficiency I'd noticed yesterday. No wasted motion, no morning stiffness despite sleeping on the ground. When she stood and turned, I quickly looked away, not wanting her to catch me staring. Too late. She walked directly toward me, water bottles dangling from her fingers. "Good morning, Emma," she said, her voice lacking the hoarseness most people have when they first wake up. "You appear unwell." "Just a hangover," I muttered, pressing my palm against my forehead. "Nothing some aspirin and coffee won't fix." Rachel's eyes fixed on my neck. She set the water bottles down and leaned closer, examining the bite with clinical interest. "That looks infected," she said, reaching toward it. I stepped back. "It's fine, just a mosquito bite." Mosquitoes are not typically active in these temperatures. Her head tilted slightly. "You should seek medical attention. I can drive you to the Brevard Medical Center. It's only 28 minutes from the trailhead." The oddly specific time estimate made me pause. "How do you know exactly how far it is?" "I researched medical facilities near our camping location before the trip. It's prudent to be prepared for emergencies." She pointed at my neck again. "That requires attention." "It's just a bite," I insisted, though it throbbed uncomfortably. "And anyway, I'm not leaving everyone here." Rachel stared at me for a beat too long. "As you wish." My stomach rolled with sudden nausea. I barely made it behind a tree before throwing up, my body expelling what little remained in my stomach from last night. When I finished, Rachel stood beside me, offering a bottle of water. "Thanks," I said, taking small sips to settle my stomach. "Your condition is not solely attributable to alcohol consumption," she stated. It wasn't a question. "You don't know that. I had more than I should have." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did, a flicker of calculation, like she was reassessing me. "I'll prepare coffee." She walked away, leaving me to rinse my mouth out. The water bottle she'd given me was ice cold despite sitting in her hands. I touched my neck again, finding the bite had swollen further, now roughly the size of a quarter. Over the next hour, the others gradually emerged from their tents, each looking various shades of miserable. Marcus walked straight to the stream and dunked his head in the cold water. George sat on a log with his head between his knees. Lily managed to look somewhat functional, though she winced at every noise louder than a whisper. Only Tina matched Rachel in alertness, bouncing around the campsite with inexplicable energy. "Beautiful morning," she chirped, causing Marcus to groan dramatically. James finally stumbled out, looking pale and disoriented. He made his way directly to me, collapsing onto the log beside me. "I'm never drinking again," he mumbled, accepting the mug of coffee I handed him. "You say that every time," I reminded him. He leaned his head against my shoulder, then suddenly pulled back. "What happened to your neck?" "Mosquito bite," I said, trying to sound unconcerned. "Pretty swollen, huh?" James made a face and touched it lightly with his fingertips. "That's not normal, Em. It's hot." "I know. I'll put antibiotic cream on it when we get back to the tents." He nodded, then turned his wrist to show me a similar red welt on his forearm. "Got one too. Weird for this time of year." I stared at his bite with growing unease. It looked identical to mine. Swollen, red with a strange darkness at its center that looked almost like a bruise. "When did you get that?" I asked. James shrugged. "No idea. Just noticed it when I woke up." Rachel approached with more coffee. "The bites will subside," she said, though neither of us had asked for her input. "They always do." Something about her phrasing made the hairs on my arm stand up. "Always?" I asked. "You get bitten by mosquitoes in 40-degree weather often?" Rachel blinked once, slowly. "I have a common blood type. Mosquitoes are attracted to certain blood compositions regardless of ambient temperature." Before I could point out how little sense that made, Tina bounded over and thrust her arm between us. "Look, I've got one too!" She displayed a bite on her inner wrist that matched ours. "Camping battle scars!" Her cheerfulness about the bite struck me as odd, especially since she'd complained for hours about a spider bite on our last trip. "Does it hurt?" I asked her. "Nope." Tina beamed. "I barely notice it." Marcus began organizing breakfast, pulling pancake mix and a portable griddle from our food storage. The routine of morning camp chores temporarily distracted me from the growing discomfort in my neck and the strangeness of Rachel's behavior. By the time we finished eating, my head was pounding worse than before. The aspirin I'd taken with breakfast hadn't touched the pain. My joints ached, and occasional chills ran through me despite the warming day. I tried to hide my discomfort, but my hands shook as I helped clean up. "Hiking the Blue Ridge Loop today?" George asked, spreading a trail map on the table. "It's about 4 miles, moderate difficulty." The thought of hiking made my stomach turn. "I might stay at camp," I said, not feeling great. "I'll stay with you," James offered, but his voice lacked conviction. He stared at nothing in particular, his usual attentiveness absent. Rachel inserted herself between us. "You should join the hike, James. Moving around will get your blood flowing and help you feel better faster." "What process?" I asked, suddenly alert despite my fatigue. Rachel's eyes snapped to mine. "The metabolization of alcohol naturally. Physical activity speeds recovery from intoxication." She turned to James. "You'll feel better after walking." To my surprise, James nodded docilely. "Yeah, okay." This wasn't like him at all. James never left me alone when I was sick, not even with something minor like a cold. Yet now he stood and gathered his day pack without argument. I caught his arm. "Hey, are you sure? You don't look great either." He gave me a vacant smile. "I'll be fine. Rachel's right. Walking will help." He patted my hand mechanically and moved away. I watched in growing confusion as both James and Tina followed Rachel's suggestions without question, packing water and snacks for the hike with synchronized movements. Their eyes had the same glazed look, their responses to questions becoming increasingly terse and simple. By mid-morning, the hiking group had departed. George, Marcus, Lily, James, Tina, and Rachel. I'd insisted on staying behind, claiming my hangover was too severe. In truth, I wanted to search Rachel's tent. The rational part of my brain said I was being paranoid, but another part, the part that had noticed Rachel speaking that strange language in the woods last night, screamed that something was deeply wrong. As soon as they were out of sight, I approached Rachel's small one-person tent. The zipper opened silently, revealing an interior that looked barely used. Her sleeping bag lay perfectly arranged, not rumpled like someone had slept in it. A small backpack sat at the foot of the sleeping bag, meticulously closed. I hesitated. This was an invasion of privacy. If I was wrong about Rachel, this would make me the weird, paranoid friend who snooped through a newcomer's belongings. But the bite on my neck throbbed, sending a wave of dizziness through me, and I remembered James's vacant expression as he'd followed Rachel's directions without question. I unzipped the backpack. Inside, I found neatly folded clothes, a toothbrush, a bottle of clear liquid labeled only with a symbol I didn't recognize, and a small notebook. The notebook contained page after page of writing in the same strange symbols, occasionally interspersed with English words. Vessel, incubation, transfer, host selections. My vision blurred suddenly, the symbols swimming on the page. I closed the notebook and returned everything exactly as I'd found it, then zipped the tent closed. Walking back to my own tent required concentration, my balance failing me twice. Inside my tent, I checked my phone for signal. Nothing. We were too deep in the national forest for reliable connection. I slumped onto my sleeping bag, exhaustion washing over me. The bite on my neck felt hot, almost vibrating. Hours passed in a haze of fever and discomfort. I drifted in and out of confused sleep, waking fully only when I heard voices returning to camp. Through the tent fabric, I could make out silhouettes gathering around the fire pit. "Happening faster than expected," Rachel was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "The transfer has begun with 2 subjects already." "What about Emma?" Marcus asked. "She doesn't look right." Her immune response is stronger. She'll require direct intervention before nightfall. I froze, straining to hear more. And the others? That was George's voice, sounding unusually flat. James and Tina are nearly ready. You and Lily will begin the process tonight. We have sufficient vessels for the initial colony. I felt sick. Vessels. Colony. The words from Rachel's notebook suddenly seemed horribly significant. Gathering what little strength I had, I crawled to the tent opening and peered out. Rachel stood with her back to me, addressing Marcus and George. James and Tina sat together on a log, unnaturally still, their eyes fixed on Rachel with pupilless devotion. Lily stood slightly apart, looking confused and wary. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Lily said. "What's wrong with James and Tina? They haven't said a word since we left the waterfall." Rachel turned toward her. "They're simply tired, as you will be soon." I must have made some noise because Rachel suddenly spun around and looked right at my tent. Then, without Rachel saying anything, both James and Tina turned to look over at my tent too. "Emma," Rachel called, "you should join us. We need to examine your bite." Her voice sounded different now. It was still soft, but underneath there was something weird, like several people were talking all at once. "I'm fine," I called back, zipping the tent closed. "Just need to rest." Footsteps approached, too light and precise to be anyone but Rachel. Her shadow fell across the tent. "Emma," she said, closer now, "the mosquito bite is worsening. Let me see it." "No thanks." A long pause followed, then, "Emma, open the tent now." The command in her voice was so forceful I almost obeyed automatically. My hand actually moved toward the zipper before I caught myself. "Go away, Rachel. I'm sleeping." "You're being unreasonable." Her voice had that strange, layered quality again. "The infection is progressing. We need to monitor the incubation." Her words made me realize I was right to be scared. This wasn't just a mosquito bite, it was something way worse. I thought back to the weird buzzing around our tent last night, the strange language Rachel had used in the forest, and how James and Tina both looked totally zoned out. "What did you do to them?" I demanded through the tent fabric. Rachel was silent for so long I thought she might have left. Then she spoke, her voice so close it seemed she was pressing her mouth directly against the tent. "Nothing they won't thank me for. The joining is a gift, Emma. Fighting it only causes pain." I crawled backward, away from her voice. "Leave me alone." "Look at me, Emma." I turned toward her voice, even though everything in me said not to. It was like I could see right through the tent wall. Her eyes looked so dark and wrong, like they weren't human. They made me feel like I was being pushed back, like something was pressing against my chest. When Marcus called Rachel's name from across the camp, she looked away. I fell back onto my sleeping bag, shaking all over. My fever got worse. My clothes were soaked with sweat, but I felt super cold. The bite on my neck hurt with every heartbeat, and when I touched it, I swear I felt something moving under my skin. I must have passed out. When I opened my eyes again, the light was different. The sunset made the tent walls look orange and red. I heard people walking outside, all stepping at the same time, which was weird. I dragged myself to the tent opening and peeked through a small gap in the zipper. Rachel was standing at the edge of our campsite with her back to me. James and Tina were in front of her, just standing there silently. They looked like copies of each other, arms down at their sides, heads tilted the same way, feet positioned exactly the same. "Follow," Rachel said, her voice now completely transformed, deeper, resonant, with that layered quality fully developed. James and Tina moved in perfect unison, following Rachel into the darkening woods. They didn't walk naturally, their movements were stiff and mechanical, like puppets being pulled by invisible strings. Even their arms swung with identical timing. I sealed the tent flap with trembling fingers, burrowing into my sleeping bag despite the fever burning through me. Whatever Rachel was, whatever she was doing to my friends, I knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't human. The mosquito bites, the strange language, the talk of vessels and transfers, it all pointed to something horrifying. Rachel was changing them, using them somehow. And she wanted to change me too. I clutched my phone in sweaty hands, willing it to find a signal, but the screen showed nothing. As consciousness slipped away again, I wondered if I'd even live long enough to call for help. I jolted awake in complete darkness, my body drenched in sweat. The fever still burned through me, but something had changed. My mind felt clearer, like breaking through the surface after being underwater too long. I fumbled for my phone, the screen illuminating the interior of the tent with harsh blue light. 2:17 a.m. I'd been unconscious for hours. The bite on my neck throbbed less intensely now, though when I touched it, the area felt strangely numb. My hand came away sticky with something that wasn't just sweat. Outside, voices carried through the night air. "This isn't right," Marcus said, his tone hushed but intense. "You need to explain what's happening." "There's nothing to explain," Rachel replied. Her voice sounded strange, alternating between her normal soft tone and something else, something deeper and raspier. "Everyone is simply unwell from the alcohol." "Bullshit," George this time. "I saw what happened to Tina. That wasn't alcohol." My breath caught. What had happened to Tina? And where was James, Lily? I leaned closer to the tent wall, straining to hear. "Show us the bite," Marcus demanded. "The one on your leg. Now." "That's unnecessary," Rachel said, the deeper voice more prominent now. "Return to your tents. In the morning, everything will be clear." "We're not going anywhere until you show us," Marcus insisted. For several seconds, only silence answered him. Then Rachel spoke, but her voice had completely changed. It sounded weird, like a bunch of people talking at the same time. "As you wish." I crawled to the tent entrance, my limbs weak and uncoordinated. Every movement took concentrated effort. Unzipping the flap just enough to peer through, I squinted against the harsh beams of their flashlights. Rachel stood with her back against a large tree, cornered by Marcus and George. Her clothes looked torn in places and wet with a dark substance that couldn't possibly be water. Too thick, too dark even in the limited light. Her posture had changed, becoming angular and almost insect-like. Marcus stepped forward and grabbed Rachel's arm. She didn't resist as he pushed aside the fabric of her torn pants, exposing her inner thigh. The flashlight revealed not a mosquito bite, but a cavity, an actual hole in her flesh at least the size of a golf ball. The wound pulsed with movement, small dark shapes writhing within it. The edges weren't ragged like a fresh injury, but smooth and almost membranous, as if this were a natural opening. George made a choking sound, stumbling backward. "What are you?" he whispered. Rachel's head rotated toward him with mechanical precision. Then something impossible happened. Her neck elongated with an audible crack, stretching several inches longer than any human neck should be capable of. Her jaw dropped open, dislocating at the hinges, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth. She lunged at Marcus with blinding speed. His scream began, but cut off abruptly as Rachel's hand, now elongated into something claw-like, covered his mouth. I watched in paralyzed horror as Marcus's body went rigid, then began to contort unnaturally. His skin stretched in places, bulging as something moved beneath it. His eyes widened, then glazed over, becoming vacant like James's had been earlier. George turned and ran toward the trail. Rachel's head snapped in his direction. She released Marcus, who remained standing but unnaturally still, and moved with impossible speed to intercept George. Her body didn't run so much as flow across the ground, joints bending in ways that defied human anatomy. I couldn't watch anymore. With trembling fingers, I sealed my tent flap as quietly as possible, then burrowed deep into my sleeping bag. The thin nylon of the tent was no protection at all, but it was all I had. The sounds that followed defied description. Wet, tearing noises mingled with muffled pleas that dissolved into gurgles. I heard voices, Marcus's and George's, speaking words that weren't their own, sometimes in English, sometimes in that bizarre language Rachel had used in the forest. Most terrifying was when they spoke simultaneously, the same words from different throats in perfect unison. And beneath it all, growing steadily louder, came the buzzing, the high-pitched whine of mosquitoes, not just a few, but hundreds, thousands perhaps. The sound swelled until it filled the entire forest, drowning out everything else, even my own panicked breathing. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it made no difference. The buzzing seemed to vibrate through my body, coming from inside me as much as outside. The bite on my neck pulsed in time with it. I pressed my hands harder against my ears, but the buzzing continued to run through my body. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical sensation, as if tiny creatures were vibrating inside me. Eventually, mercifully, the noises outside began to fade. The wet, tearing sounds stopped. The unified voices of Marcus and George went silent. Even the all-encompassing buzz of the mosquitoes got quieter to a background noise. I don't know how long I lay there, curled into myself. Minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning as the fever took over me. My clothes stuck to my skin, completely soaked through with sweat. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter despite the heat burning inside me, as if its thin synthetic fabric could somehow protect me from what waited outside. The camp had gone eerily quiet, too quiet. No normal forest sounds, no birds, no rustling leaves, no distant stream noise, just silence, occasionally broken by soft footsteps circling my tent. My hand moved to my neck, finding the mosquito bite. What I felt there nearly made me vomit. The swelling had changed texture, becoming firmer around the edges, while the center felt soft and yielding. As my fingertips pressed lightly, something beneath the skin responded, a subtle movement like touching a water balloon with something solid suspended inside. I yanked my hand away, suppressing a scream. My phone lay beside me, its battery down to 20%. With shaking fingers, I tried again to call 911, watching the searching for service message mock me before displaying emergency calls only. Even that was a lie. The call failed to connect, just as it had the previous dozen attempts. A text message to my parents showed the same failed delivery icon that had appeared earlier. We were too deep in the national forest, surrounded by mountains that blocked any signal. The phone was useless. I switched it off to conserve battery, plunging the tent into darkness again. My consciousness came and went as the fever cycled through waves of intensity. During one more clear moment, I realized the movement in my neck had increased. Whatever was inside the bite was growing more active, pressing outward against my skin from within. "Stop," I whispered, pressing my palm against it, as if I could physically restrain whatever lived beneath my skin. A voice came from just outside my tent. "Emma?" James's voice, his normal voice. "Emma? Are you okay? Everyone's worried." Relief hit me so hard I nearly cried out. James was okay. He was himself again. Not like before when his eyes had been vacant, his voice mechanical. This was my James, concerned, caring. "James?" My voice cracked, barely audible. "Emma, please come out. You're sick. We need to help you." I hesitated. What if this was a trick? What if Rachel was forcing him to lure me out? "James, where's Rachel?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause. "She went to get help. Please, Em. I'm worried about you." His voice sounded right. It sounded like him. Maybe whatever Rachel had done to him had worn off. Maybe I'd imagined the worst of it in my fever. My fingers found the tent zipper. I pulled it slowly, creating a small opening. "James." "I'm right here, Em." I pushed the tent flap open further, hope overcoming caution. What stood outside wasn't my James. He was naked, his pale skin way too tight on his body. The mosquito bites from yesterday had gotten worse and spread all over his chest and arms. His stomach stuck out weirdly, like he'd swallowed something huge, and I could see something moving under his skin. But his face was the worst. His cheeks were sunken in. His eyes were red and bulging out. His lips were pulled back in what he probably thought was a smile, but looked more like he was in pain. I tried to zip the tent closed again, but my weakened fingers fumbled with the zipper. "It doesn't hurt," James said, but the voice wasn't his. It was Rachel's voice coming from James's mouth. "You'll see." I scrambled backward, retreating deeper into the tent. "James, please," I begged, though I knew James wasn't in control anymore. "Fight this, please." "Why fight what you can join?" Rachel's voice asked through James's stretched lips. "He's happier now, part of something greater." As I watched, a vertical line appeared down the center of James's body, starting at his throat. The line got wider, the skin splitting open. There was surprisingly little blood, just a thick, clear fluid that oozed out as the opening extended down past his chest, across his big stomach all the way to his groin. James's body split open and then collapsed, falling in on itself like empty clothing dropped to the ground. Behind where he had stood was Rachel. She was covered in the same clear fluid, her body changed into something not human at all. She stood at least 7 feet tall, her limbs stretched out and bent in extra places. Her skin had turned almost see-through, showing dark, moving shapes inside her body and limbs. Her fingers had grown into foot-long digits that bent in multiple directions. Her face kept just enough human features for me to recognize her, which made the changes even more scary. Her jaw hung open wider than any human mouth could stretch, showing rows of tiny, needle-like teeth. "We needed new vessels," Rachel explained with the same clinical detachment she'd shown when discussing mosquito bites. "The old ones were failing. Yours will be perfect too." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream as she reached one elongated hand toward the tent opening. The bite on my neck suddenly burned with new intensity. The pain was so sharp and sudden that my back arched involuntarily. I felt something tear, not just the skin, but deeper, as if hundreds of tiny mouths were eating their way outward from inside me. The bite ruptured. I felt rather than saw dozens of tiny insects pouring from the wound on my neck. They swarmed into the air, filling my vision with dark specks before flying in perfect unison toward Rachel. Her mouth, if it could still be called that, stretched into what might have been a smile as the swarm returned to her. I fell back into the tent, totally scared as Rachel's weirdly long fingers reached for me. The mosquitoes that burst from my neck wound, floated between us, like a dark cloud just waiting for orders. My throat tightened up, and I couldn't scream while Rachel's ugly shape blocked the tent entrance. Then someone shouted in the night. It was George from the other side of camp. Rachel's head turned that way really fast, her stretched out neck bending in a way that shouldn't be possible. "I'll come back for you," she said, her voice a layered collection of tones rather than a single human sound. "The incubation is nearly complete." She backed away from my tent, moving in that weird way I noticed before. Not normal walking, but more like sliding along the ground like she didn't have any bones. I tried to get up, to crawl out and run, but I couldn't move right. My arms and legs felt too heavy to lift. Those bugs from the mosquito bite were messing with my body already. All I could do was drag myself toward the tent opening. Through the flap, I saw Rachel heading for George's tent. She moved super fast, getting across our campsite in no time. Just then, George jumped out of his tent, looking totally freaked out. He was holding the small axe we brought to chop wood. "Stay back!" George screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "What did you do to them? What did you do to Marcus?" Rachel tilted her head, looking at him like a scientist with a test subject. "The same thing I'll do to you." Her voice was easy to hear across the campsite, but she wasn't yelling. George charged forward with the hatchet, swinging it wildly. The blade hit Rachel's outstretched arm, cutting off 2 long fingers that dropped to the ground with a wet slap. I wanted to scream, but couldn't make a sound as I waited for blood to come out. But there wasn't any. Just that same clear, sticky liquid that had covered James's remains. What happened next was worse. The cut-off fingers didn't stay still. They twitched, curled, then started crawling across the dirt like spiders, making their way back to Rachel. Rachel didn't even react to losing her fingers. She just watched George with that same cold interest as her fingers climbed up her leg and stuck back onto her hand, joining together like they'd never been cut off. George backed up, dropping the hatchet from his shaking hand. His legs gave out and he fell to his knees. Rachel opened her mouth and made a series of clicks and whistles, that weird language I'd heard her speaking alone in the forest. The sound had a pattern to it, carrying meaning beyond what people normally say. George's body went stiff. His eyes got big as he grabbed at his throat. When he opened his mouth, instead of screaming, he threw up. Not liquid, but something alive. Mosquitoes poured from his lips in a thick stream, coming from inside him like a nightmare. They swarmed around his face, covering it completely until you couldn't see his features behind the moving, wiggling mask. His body shook violently, arms and legs jerking. Then he collapsed face down on the ground. The mosquito swarm lifted off his still body and hung in the air like a thinking cloud before flowing toward Rachel, soaking into her skin like she was absorbing them. My vision started to go dark around the edges as I lost feeling in my body. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. My arms wouldn't hold me up. I fell onto my side, my cheek against the tent floor. I could still see through the opening, still watch the horror happening outside, but I couldn't move, couldn't fight, couldn't run. The sound of careful footsteps came toward my tent again. Rachel's weird shadow fell across the entrance. "It hurts less if you don't fight it," her multi-layered voice said soothingly, as one might speak to a frightened child. "The joining is a gift. You'll understand soon." As my consciousness faded, clarity struck with terrible force. Rachel wasn't human, had never been human. She wasn't even a single entity. She was a colony, a collective of organisms using human appearance as a disguise. The mosquitoes weren't just carriers, they were extensions of her, vectors to spread her kind to new hosts. My thoughts grew sluggish as the darkness closed in. The last thing I saw was Rachel's elongated hand reaching through the tent opening toward me, her fingers unfurling like the legs of a spider. Then consciousness left me completely. Consciousness returned in waves. First sound, then sensation, then blinding light. I heard a voice calling through thick fog. "Ma'am, can you hear me? We need to get you to a hospital." I tried to answer, but my mouth felt stuffed with cotton. My eyelids weighed 1,000 pounds each. When I finally managed to pry them open, a face swam into view. A man in a forest green uniform, his expression tight with concern. Park Ranger. The realization filtered slowly through my muddled brain. "My friends," I croaked. My voice sounded wrong, like it belonged to someone else. His face changed. Pity, maybe. Or horror. "Just stay still. Paramedics are coming." Memory returned in brutal flashes. Rachel reaching into my tent. James's body splitting open. George convulsing as mosquitoes poured from his mouth. I tried to sit up but couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. Not paralyzed exactly, but disconnected, like I was attempting to operate unfamiliar machinery. "How long?" I asked. "We got a call from some hikers. They found the campsite this morning. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," I whispered. "Emma Briggs." "Emma, I'm Ranger Michaels. You're going to be okay." He was lying. I could see it in his eyes. I'd never be okay again. More voices joined his, more uniforms. A stretcher. Questions I couldn't answer. As they lifted me, I caught glimpses of the campsite. Yellow police tape, white hazmat suits, black body bags. "My friends," I said again, but no one answered. Someone mentioned 36 hours. I'd been alone with what remained of my friends for 36 hours. The thought made my stomach turn as I passed out again. The hospital room came into focus slowly. White walls, beeping machines, clear tubes running into my arms. My parents asleep in uncomfortable chairs beside the bed. According to the whiteboard across from me, I was in Asheville Regional Hospital. It was Tuesday. I'd been admitted Saturday evening. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried over, her voice hushed. "Welcome back, honey. You've had quite the ordeal." My parents startled awake. My mother's face crumpled when she saw my eyes open. My father just stood there, too shocked to move. "Water," I managed. After small sips through a straw, questions poured from everyone. How was I feeling? Did I remember what happened? Was I in pain? I remembered everything, every horrific detail, but I said nothing. A doctor came, Dr. Patel according to her name tag. She explained my condition with clinical precision: severe dehydration, anaphylactic shock, and a parasitic infection transmitted by an unusual species of mosquito. They'd extracted 13 larvae from the wound on my neck while I was unconscious. 13, I repeated. The number seemed significant, though I couldn't say why. "You're very lucky to be alive, Miss Briggs," Dr. Patel said. "We believe your allergy medication created an inhospitable environment for the parasites. Without it, you likely would have suffered the same fate as your friends." I wanted to laugh. Luck had nothing to do with it. Rachel had simply run out of time. She'd been planning to come back for me, to finish what she'd started, but something had interrupted her. The park rangers, maybe. Or perhaps she'd gotten what she needed from the others. "Your friends," Dr. Patel continued, her voice softening. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Loss. Such an inadequate word for what had happened. When Dr. Patel left, 2 men in suits took her place. Investigators from the National Park Service, they said. They had questions about what had occurred at the campsite. I told them everything. About Rachel showing up with Tina. About the mosquito bites that appeared despite the cold. About James and Tina becoming vacant puppets. About Rachel's transformation. About the swarm that emerged from my neck. They exchanged looks as I spoke, the kind adults give children who insist they've seen monsters under the bed. "Miss Briggs," the older investigator said gently when I finished, "your medical records indicate you experienced extreme fever and toxicity. Hallucinations are common in such cases." "It wasn't a hallucination," I insisted, my voice breaking. "Rachel wasn't human. She was using us as vessels for her offspring. We've found no records of any Rachel Noctua enrolled at UNC Chapel Hill," the younger investigator said. "Are you certain that was her name?" "Yes," I whispered, doubt creeping in for the first time. "She was a transfer student, Tina's study partner." They made more notes, their expressions carefully neutral. "Our working theory," the older one continued, "is that your campsite encountered an unusually aggressive swarm of mosquitoes, possibly carrying a neurotoxin that induced paranoia and violent behavior. The autopsy reports indicate your friends attacked each other before succumbing to the toxins themselves." I closed my eyes. They would never believe me. Maybe that was for the best. "We'll need your formal statement once you're further along in your recovery," the younger man said, handing me his card. "Please call when you feel up to it." After they left, my parents tried to comfort me, assuring me I didn't have to think about any of this now. I nodded and pretended to sleep until they stepped out for coffee. Alone, I pulled the hospital gown away from my neck. A thick bandage covered the bite site. I peeled back one corner. Beneath it, the wound was nearly closed, pink and healthy. No sign of the horror that had erupted from it days before. 3 weeks passed in a blur of blood tests, psychiatric evaluations, and well-meaning visitors I couldn't bear to face. The medical team monitored me for signs of continued infection, but found nothing. My blood work gradually cleared. The wound on my neck healed to a small, crescent-shaped scar. "Physically, you're making an excellent recovery," Dr. Patel told me during one of her rounds. but I'm concerned about your emotional state. Survivor's guilt is normal after losing friends in such traumatic circumstances. I nodded because it was easier than arguing. They'd already scheduled me for trauma counseling back in Chapel Hill. The university had arranged for incomplete grades in all my courses, with options to finish remotely or return in the fall semester. Everyone was so understanding, so sympathetic, and so wrong about what had actually happened. The funerals came next. 5 closed caskets because there wasn't enough left of any of them to display. I attended them all, watching parents collapse in grief, siblings deliver eulogies, friends share memories. I said nothing at any of them. What could I possibly say? The bite on my neck continued to heal, but sometimes, particularly when I was half asleep, I felt movement beneath my skin. A memory of infestation, the doctors assured me when I mentioned it. Phantom sensations were common after parasitic removal. Nothing to worry about. The night before I was finally released from the hospital, I woke suddenly from a dreamless sleep. The room was dark except for the dim glow of monitors. For a moment I thought I was alone. Then I noticed a figure standing in the corner. Tall, impossibly still. "Hello, Emma," Rachel's voice whispered, though the figure didn't move. "Did you think it was over?" I fumbled for the call button, totally freaked out. "They'll say it was a dream," Rachel's voice continued. "They'll never believe you. But you know the truth." The night nurse rushed in, flipping on the lights. "Miss Briggs, are you all right?" The corner was empty. Of course it was. "Bad dream," I mumbled, my eyes fixed on the spot where Rachel had stood. "Sorry." The nurse checked my vitals, then dimmed the lights again before leaving. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning came, Dr. Patel conducted her final examination before signing my discharge papers. "The good news is you're completely parasite-free," she said, reviewing my latest blood work. "No trace of the infection remains. You can return to normal life, though I recommend continuing therapy for at least 6 months. Normal life. As if such a thing still existed for me. My parents drove me back to Chapel Hill that afternoon. They wanted me to come home with them to Charlotte, but I insisted on returning to my apartment. I needed to pack up James's things, I told them. I needed closure. What I really needed was to convince myself that Rachel was gone, that the mosquitoes were dead, that the movement I sometimes felt beneath my skin was just my imagination. But as I lay in bed that first night back in my apartment, James's side empty and cold, I heard her voice again, whispering from the darkest corner of my room. "I'm still waiting, Emma, patient, hungry for suitable vessels." I switched on every light and searched the entire apartment. Nothing, no one. I was alone, but I knew better. We were never really alone, not anymore.